Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good day,
Good
eh?
night.
Welcome to Homily Chat. I'm Father Darryl Millette here in Saskatoon, Father Michael Liliedahl in San Francisco. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, and it is afternoon. This is a rare kind of afternoon, kind of a normal time we actually get to record. The last couple of weeks, we've had to do it, I think, at 8 at night, 9 at night, and so it just worked out this week that we could do it, before dinner. So it's good to see you before dinner today.
It is. It is. I mean, it's good. I'm hearing confessions and leading adoration tonight, so this was my time slot, so it worked out well.
And it worked for me because it was right after the school day and before I have some evening meetings tonight as well, and so it fits perfectly in. And I will say I did do the research I promised to do last week. I did the minutes and minutes of research it took to look at the ordo to see if our ordo had listed whether or not we could do the rotation. And no, it doesn't say you can't do it, but that's not the way the law works. It was not listed in there to rotate it.
So. Okay, so what we were talking about was last week. In Canada, we have an option for if it's like just a regular ordinary time mass during the week. You can either use the prayers from the preceding Sunday Mass, which is the practice that you have in the United States, or they also list just to rotate through different prayers each day to cycle through them. So that's an option. The one that's printed in these little missalettes is the cycled option. So if I pick the prayer from the preceding Sunday, you see people in here and they're like flipping pages and they're trying to figure out what I'm doing, which is great. It's always a good thing. Anyway, confusing the people. But anyway, yeah.
I always look at that as well as kind of confusing because I see people will have that, and sometimes you have an optional memorial, and sometimes you have like I think not today, but yesterday, at least in the United States, we had two different optional memorials. So you have of course, the option of not doing the memorial, and you have the option of doing the first person, which was King Louis, the King of France, and then the other one was Saint Peter, something from Spain. I'll be honest. I had never heard of him, so I didn't do him. I did King Louis.
Saint Joseph Calasanz?
Yes, that is it. Saint Joseph. So not Peter, Saint Joseph Calasanz, who I knew nothing about. And I was talking to our sacristan in the back. He said, I think he was from Spain. That's what I read this morning. But before this morning, I knew nothing about him.
He was canonized in 1767 and is a patron of schools serving the needs of poor children. I just learned.
Yeah, exactly. I have no doubt that he's a holy man and a good man. Of course, he's canonized, but I just know nothing about him. And so when you have that option of doing nothing, King Louis or the saint I didn't know, I did the prayer for King
I know there's a parish in a city not in my diocese, about an hour away from here, named after him. So I've heard the name. I didn't know anything about him until just now. So 1767, I guess, is when he was canonized. Doesn't say when he lived, mind you. It's just when he was canonized. So
that's right. And some of those saints take, some of them go very, very quickly, especially in modern time. We canonized Mother Teresa, St. John Paul II. Even if you look at it, the canonization of St. John the 23rd, even though, he died in the late 50s so he died around 1960 and was canonized about 5 or 6 years ago. Even that's pretty fast for the canonization process. I mean, some of these people, especially if he's canonized in the 1700s, it's possible he lived in the 1400s and the 1300s.
Yeah. I mean, I was blessed to be able to be at St. Kateri Tekakwitha, her canonization 2012. She did not die in the 2000s or the 1900s or the 1700s or the 1600s. She died in the 1500s, so it took a little while. I think it was 1500s. Now that I've said that on the podcast, do I have to do some Googling too?
Yeah, I think you have to Google it. And so
I should know this
while you Google it, I will say this. I have never heard two priests pronounce her name the same way. So every time I hear somebody pronounce her last name, it's a different pronunciation.
She died 1680. There we go.
Okay.
So I guess I was off. What's a century, really?
Yeah, in the grand scheme of things, it's not very much at all. So.
And the reason I'm saying St. Kateri is that's how I heard it pronounced at her canonization, which might be totally wrong. So,
because that might be how you pronounce it in Italian. Who knows? Where was her canonization?
It was at St. Peter's outdoors.
Okay.
Pope Benedict XVI. There were actually 7 saints canonized at that mass. So there were a lot of people. And I found a spot in the shade under the columns and just kind of watched. And yeah, I don't understand Italian, so, or actually much Latin either. So,
well, it's still an incredible event to be at and to witness and to see the whole thing. I was blessed to be at the canonization for Saint Junipero Serra, who founded all the missions around California when Pope Francis came to Washington, D.C. What would that have been, about 6 years ago now, to do that canonization. Thankfully, that was primarily in English, so I could understand almost all of it. But yeah, what a heck of an event to be at.
It was. And I mean, the night before the canonization, I'm not sure how it happened, but the Canadian, because she was the only, person from this part of the world to be canonized. There was someone from the Philippines and some Europeans and so forth. But the Canadian delegation, because she died around modern-day Montreal, born in modern-day United States, the Canadian delegation managed to book the cathedral, the Basilica of St. John Lateran. So, I mean, there was maybe 1,500 of us, which is a lot of people, but in that church, it doesn't seem that much. So it was like this really kind of cool little evening prayer service that we had, just the Canadians in the Cathedral of Rome.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I'll tell you this: I would give anything to have 1,500 people in my church for any service or mass or anything. So.
It was cool. I mean, there were a number of people from the First Nations communities in Canada who were attending. One of their own, and so a number of the prayers that were done were either in their own languages or according to their traditions, and it was beautiful. It was really cool. Kind of an experience of universality in a way, because here we are in the Cathedral of Rome. And all this really beautiful indigenous prayer happening. And it's quite something. Anyway, I have no idea how we got on that.
Because we were talking about saints, and then we're talking about optional feast days, and then, all kinds of things. So,
welcome to Homily Chat, where we get sidetracked.
And don't talk about homilies until 10 minutes into the podcast.
Right. Well, should we maybe... start talking about homilies then?
Yeah, I think we should do that.
Okay.
So I think you are reading the gospel for me this week, right?
And we're back again in Mark. So we had that little stint where we were reading through St. John. Of course, it was interrupted by one Sunday because of the Assumption of Mary. But now we're back into Mark. And so this one, they take 3 little snippets out of chapter 7 of Mark's gospel. So we'll read this in the New Revised Standard Canadian Version. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Lord.
When the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups, pots, and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" Jesus said to them, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites, as it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition.'" Then Jesus called the crowd again and said to them, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile them, but the things that come out of a person are what defile them. For it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person. The gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. We were briefly talking about this gospel before we started recording, and I said, well, thankfully we don't have to do this as a school mass. You know, if this were like a family mass where we're essentially at my parish once a month, we haven't started this yet. It'll start in October. Once a month, one of the school classes kind of hosts a mass, and so they have some of the students will serve as the ushers, as the readers, and bringing up the gifts and whatnot. And generally, you try to preach to that class, you know, on that day. And I can't imagine, you know, a gospel like, oh, okay, let's talk about what does Jesus say that we all have inside of us. Oh, and you know, in our translation, unchastity, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, licentiousness. Not the greatest one, but I was thinking about this because we've not only today, but yesterday in the Gospel of the daily readings, we have Jesus interacting with Scribes and Pharisees and calling them hypocrites. It's kind of this theme that we're on right now. And I think it's important to know who are the Pharisees. And Jane just responded that her kids are listening. So we have it right there. So yeah, so it is in the gospel. So I didn't say anything that wasn't in the gospel. But to talk about who the scribes are and who the Pharisees are, because we hear a lot about the Pharisees especially, but I don't think we all exactly know who the Pharisees are. And so I think it is a good opportunity to teach people, well, who are the Pharisees? And in order to understand the Pharisees, you have to know a little bit about the history of the Israeli people, the Israelites. So when they were given the promised land, they were given kind of the blessing of God. But the things didn't always go so swimmingly when they were in the promised land. They began to be conquered. Their kingdom divided. The northern kingdom was conquered. Then the southern kingdom was conquered. They were sent into exile. All their leading academics, all their leading businessmen, all the kind of the elite of society were taken away. And they began to think, why are we not blessed anymore? We were blessed and given this land. What did we do to kind of lose the blessing of God? And this group began to say, well, what we did to lose the blessing of God was we weren't following the law close enough. And so they said, if we want to regain that blessing of God, we have to make sure we follow the law basically to the letter. And so that's kind of the Pharisee tradition. This tradition of the Pharisees is if we follow the law, we will regain God's blessing. And the temptation there is there is some good in that, right? Because we are called to follow the law, because we may have different laws than the Jewish people had in the first century in terms of what we're allowed to eat, things that we do. But we do have kind of rules and laws that we have to follow. And I think we had faced the same temptation that some of the Pharisees faced, which was to look at the law as being what justifies us. And the Pharisees said, if we follow the law, that will justify us. It doesn't matter if the law begins to affect us. It doesn't matter if the law leads us to Christ. It doesn't matter what the law points to, as long as we follow the law itself. And so I think with the Pharisees, the reason Jesus gets so frustrated with the Pharisees is that they are so fixated on the law, they forget the reason the law exists. And I think we have that temptation as well sometimes, that we look at, okay, what am I allowed to do? What do I have to do? And we get so fixated on that point, we forget that, well, what is the law supposed to point us to? It's supposed to point us to following Jesus Christ. And so that's the one thing. Then you also have this group, the Scribes. And the Scribes are a little bit easier to describe who they are, because the Scribes, you don't have a printing press. So how does the scrolls that they read from at the service, and how do those get passed on? Well, somebody has to sit there and copy it word for word for word. And the Scribes, that's what they do. And so if you're a person who copies the scrolls word for word over and over again, you just naturally get to know them very, very well. And so they had this really authoritative position because they knew the law so well from having written it over and over again. And then what do we have in this one? It says that they were the Scribes and the Pharisees who had come from Jerusalem. So that gives them even a greater level of authority. They're from the capital, right? You have these Scribes, these Pharisees coming from the capital to challenge Jesus. And what does Jesus do? He, again, kind of reminds them of that temptation that they've fallen into. You have allowed the law to justify you. You're so worried about what you're doing physically that you lose track of what you're doing, how it is supposed to affect you, about what you're doing, what it is supposed to point to. Because everything in our life, everything we do, points to something beyond itself. And I think that's what he's saying that the Pharisees are forgetting, that these rules are good when you follow them because they point to something, right? They point to something. And if you forget that they point to something, if you think that they just stop with themselves, that's where you fall into this trap. And it's a trap that some of us can fall into as well. And so that's what I'm thinking about going to, is looking at, what are some of those same traps that we may find ourselves, those same kind of pharisaical traps that we might have? Because I know some of the people who don't really like the Catholic Church, who say we have too many rules and whatnot, they will quote this piece of scripture that we disregard God's commandment but cling to human tradition. They say, well, all these things that you're doing, those are just human traditions. And we want to say, no, they're given by God, but they're given by God for a purpose, to point us back to God.
No, absolutely. And of course, as you're speaking, just thinking, I just recently signed up for my latest classes in canon law.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like literally studying the rules of the church, right?
Yeah.
But I'm just here. Let me just call up what is Canon 1752, which I'm sure you've committed to memory. It's the last canon in the code, in the Latin code, in the code that we have in the Western churches here.
Mm-hmm.
And this is dealing with, it's actually pretty, how you deal with transferring pastors. Very exciting. But it ends with a phrase that is meant to inform the whole entirety of the law of the church. So in cases of transfer of the prescripts of Canon 1747 are to be applied. Canonical equity is to be observed. And the salvation of souls, which must always be the supreme law in the church, is to be kept before one's eyes. So it begins with kind of a dry, this is the kind of the procedure you do. But the salvation of souls, which must always be the supreme law in the church, is to be kept before one's eyes. That can be a real challenge to remember at times. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it was any different for the Pharisees and the Scribes. Like you say, you miss the forest for the trees in a way, to miss what it's all about. It's like, I like the example that Bishop Robert Barron uses of baseball. He put any sport into it, right? Mm-hmm. Every sport has its rules, what you do, what you don't do, why you do it, what the point of the game is, etc. But it's all at the service of a deeper reality to let the game unfold. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. You don't in hockey, you're not a stickler for the offside rule just because you want to be a stickler for the offside rule, but because it lets the game unfold in all of its beauty and grandeur and all the stuff that hockey is.
Yeah. And I know he's talked about this, going back to baseball, because, he and I are both Americans. So we kind of lend easier to baseball than to hockey. But I know he's talked about this. He talks about, well, when we evangelize, when we introduce people to Jesus Christ or introduce people to the faith, he said it's, when you introduce someone to baseball, you don't start with trying to describe what the infield fly rule is, because it's a fairly complicated rule. And it doesn't make sense unless you know other parts of it. You start with just the basics. The goal is to score more runs than the other team, and you have, you have a pitcher and a batter. You start with the very, very basics. And I think like you said, if you lose sight of the forest for the trees, you get so bogged down into the rules, be it offsides in hockey, or I'll be honest, I still don't understand that shape behind the goal where the goalie is allowed to handle the puck. And I don't quite fully understand that. But the one thing I do love watching is watching hockey and just watching the flow of the game, the way the flow just happens. Yeah. That beauty astounds me, even if I don't understand all the rules. Even if sometimes they say, oh, that was icing, and sometimes you go, oh, that wasn't icing. I'm kind of like, oh, it looked pretty similar to me. I can still appreciate the beauty of the game. And I think that's part of it, is looking at what the rules do. The rules, in a sense, are designed to free us. I think another thing Bishop Barron has once said is rules, especially like in sports, they prevent chaos from breaking out. Mm-hmm. Right? If you switch sports, if you have basketball, you have five people of one team, 5 people of another team, and a ball in the hoops, but you have no rules like out of bounds and what you're allowed to do when you're guarding the other team, and you're, if you can't drill, no rules about dribbling or passing. chaos just breaks out. It makes me think of Calvin Ball from Calvin and Hobbes, right? Where they just kind of make up the rules as they go along, and every game is completely different, and it always ends in a fight, right?
Yeah.
The rules and boundaries allow for real creativity. I mean, if you think about it, think about the most skilled athletes you've ever seen, be it Wayne Gretzky or Michael Jordan. And think about that, their creativity was allowed to be shown and allowed to be appreciated because the rules allowed that creativity to shine. So in a sense, the rules, most of us think of the rules as kind of confining, but in a sense, they just allow that space for creativity to happen.
And it's also important with that too, to recognize that different rules have different levels of importance too. So observing the tradition of washing cups and pots and bronze kettles, washing the dish is a good thing to do. Is it as important as, serving the poor, for example, or whatever other commandments of God might be? Following the 10 commandments. Well, no, it's not as important as that. They're useful, like you say, to prevent chaos for breaking forth. It's like, the Canon I cited, Canon 1752, dealing with how you how you transfer pastors and stuff. Is that the most important thing in the world? No, but it sure prevents a lot of chaos,
Yes, it does. And it sounds like you're almost leading into another gospel. Like if you're talking about, well, Jesus, what is the most important commandment? I wonder if he answered that for us once.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, in some ways, I think the second reading kind of ties into this in a certain way. So it's from the first chapter of St. James. And I mean, it's a very poetic, very beautiful reading. But at one point he says, "Welcome with meekness the implanted word that has the power to save your souls." And again, what are the laws of God designed to do? To help us welcome the implanted word, who is Jesus Christ, so that he can save us. It's meant to lead us to salvation, So, I like Gloria just made the comment, love a clean kitchen. Serve the poor is great. Yeah, it's important to have a clean kitchen, to wash the pots and the kettles and the whatever, to serve the poor. But if you forget about
that actually reminds me of a one of the sayings, or I think it's a quote, and it may be a misattributed. It may be she didn't actually say it, but it's often been attributed to Mother Teresa that don't wash the dish because the dish is dirty. Wash the dish because you love who's going to use it next. And so you're allowing that basically a chore of washing the dishes to be in service, in loving service to the next person who's going to be using the dish.
I like that a lot. I hadn't heard that one, but I like that a lot. Let's say it's from St. Mother Teresa.
Yeah, we'll give it to her. We'll say that. So,
there is a law there about saying things that aren't true. But anyway, it's towards the back, right? So I mean, the second reading is, this one you could preach on too. Every generous act of giving with every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights. I love that phrase, the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. In fulfillment of his own purpose, he gave us birth by the word of truth, so that we would become a kind of first fruits of his creatures. It's a very poetic, beautiful, the providence of God, his design for our lives, ultimately for our salvation. Yeah, there's a lot we could probably chew on there too.
Oh, I think so for sure. And I will say this is another thing I'd like to kind of do in the homilies that I don't think this one quite lends itself towards, but it does present an opportunity, because if you read it, like when I'm reading it from a text, or when you read it from the text, there are sometimes when Jesus is quoting prophecies from the Old Testament. And when you just kind of listen to it, it's very difficult to pick up when Jesus is actually quoting the Old Testament. But when you read it, it becomes easy, because at least in our version, it's in italics. And so here, at least in the American versions, Jesus says, well did Isaiah prophesy about you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrine human precepts. So we know when we read it kind of visually, that's where the prophecy stops. And the next words become Jesus's original, not his original words, but they come the words that he's not quoting from the Old Testament, where he says, you disregard God's commandment, but cling to human tradition. And there are sometimes, I think, where it's important to realize when Jesus is quoting the Old Testament and when he's kind of saying his own words. This one, it doesn't really seem to lend itself towards that, but there are places in the gospel, I find this especially in daily homilies, where recognizing what Jesus is, if he's saying his own words or if he's quoting from scriptures, is kind of important to notice that it can be very difficult to pick up if you're just listening to it and not reading it.
Well, this would be, see, where our general or our ordo lets us rotate through prayers, yours provides you with your liturgy provides you with italicized.
Oh, really? So yours
here.
Doesn't? Okay.
No, I've never. That's actually a really good feature. Maybe
it is. Yeah.
That would be really helpful because he's constantly quoting scripture and
well, nice. Especially Isaiah. He quotes Isaiah almost quite a bit, especially when he's prophesying about his own upcoming suffering. He's going to be quoting Isaiah quite a bit, and I find it very helpful to pull those out and kind of look at those as sources for homilies. So if you don't have it in your book, you can look on USCCB on their readings. They have it in italicized font when it's from the Old Testament.
Huh. Well, now I want to look this up. Well, this has just been a day of like looking up stuff online. It's very exciting for everybody who's watching, I'm sure. Just, I'm you can't even see what I'm doing. I'm clicking daily readings. All right, let's go to 29th. All right. Because that'll be Sunday the 29th. And scroll down. Oh, look at that. Italics and everything. Not that I didn't believe you. I just wanted to see it or something.
And actually, almost every lectionary that I've seen in the United States has those parts in italics. So,
how about that?
Yep, there you go. So now you're finding out more about the ecclesial differences between Canada and the United States.
Wow. That's amazing. Cool. The first reading from Deuteronomy. I think this is Moses basically some of his departing words before he dies, right? Exhorting to the people to observe the laws and the ordinances of the Lord, diligently. So, I mean, it's, it might be tempting to read a gospel like this and to say, well, this is all against law and law is not important. It really is. It's about framing it properly, framing the law properly. And happy birthday, Gloria. I mentioned the 29th. There you go. If you're watching this, give her a happy birthday. She mentioned in the comments. So, but I mean, the law, God made law. Like, it's not something that's unimportant, but it does allow the most important laws to unfold, which are Hear, O Israel.
Love God.
Yeah.
And
the Lord your God is God alone. Therefore, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. Take to heart these words which I enjoin you today. Drill them into your children. Yeah. We read that, it's in the Liturgy of the Hours. We read that for night prayer every Saturday. So.
Yeah. And I love that story about, some of the Jewish people will take the law actually and wrap it around their arm at their bar mitzvah. And I've seen it. We have an Orthodox Jewish restaurant that serves falafel that I like to go to in San Jose. And they have the scroll of the law right inside the inside door frame. So as you walk in, you just kind of touch it as that reminder of the law. So
yeah. I mean, that was a refrain that you hear at different points in the Old Testament is how special the people of God are, that God has given them his statutes, his laws, that he cares for them enough. He wants to teach them. So, pretty cool. Well, we've been actually at this for a half hour already almost.
Wow. Okay.
Pretty incredible. About 29 and a half minutes.
Well, hopefully our homilies don't go 29 and a half minutes this Sunday. So
yeah. That would be bad. That would not be good. But no, thank you everyone for joining us again. It's great to be able to do this again at a normal time where there's still light outside. It's really helpful. And until next time, well, first of all, head over to homilychat.com. You can subscribe in all the ways over there, watch the video. Sorry about last week. I totally forgot to send the MP3 file to Father Michael to post before Sunday. That was me.
That's okay.
So
That's
the
okay.
last week's episode, the podcast version came late, but anyway.
But yeah, let us know what you heard. Let us know what your thoughts are. Let us know your experiences with these readings, and let us know. Get back to us. And I guess until next time, since we were doing a baseball analogy, I'll just say, throw strikes.
Throw strikes. Keep your stick on the ice.
We'll see you later. Ciao, ciao.